Nhầm. Đây màn hình này mới đúng chứ. Ok. Xin chào. Hello. Đây là 15 tháng 7 rồi. Và lần live gần nhất của mình ấy là ngày mùng 3. Tức là mình nghỉ 4 ngày liên tiếp liền. Từ lúc mà mình bắt đầu live stream đến bây giờ, đây là lần đầu tiên mà mình nghỉ dài như vậy. Nhưng mà mình nghĩ là mình phải quay lại thôi. Đơn giản là vì thấy nó trôi quá. Cứ nghĩ là hôm nay sẽ làm, không phải làm, mà hôm nay sẽ livestream. Xong rồi đến giờ lại lười lại thôi, lại kiểu nản này, không muốn làm, không muốn bật máy lên. Thì hôm nay là một tuần mới, mà một tuần mới thì live thôi nhỉ. Hôm nay mình sẽ xem một cái mà nó khá là liên quan đến cái việc mà xảy ra cái đây 2 hôm, một sự kiện rất là quan trọng. Cái video này, video của Lex Fridman, podcast phỏng vấn với cả gọi là gì, Ivanka Trump, là con gái của Trump, con gái của Donald Trump. Và cái đây 2 ngày, 3 ngày hả? Ngày 13 đúng không? Là 3 ngày rồi. Cái đây 3 ngày. 2 ngày chứ. Thì Donald Trump bị ám sát, may không chết. Kiểu bị sượt qua tai mà đúng là nghĩ đơn giản khi mà cái viên đạn nó lệch chỉ cần 1 inch nữa thôi thì đúng là không biết chuyện gì xảy ra. Vì thực ra một người giỏi, một người quyền lực, một người giàu mà chết nó đã là một cái gì rất là ghê gớm rồi. Nhưng mà đây là ứng cử viên tổng thống và tổng thống Mỹ, thì đúng là cái việc mà ông đấy vẫn bình an vô sự, sau bình an vẫn là bình an chứ không vô sự thì không đúng lắm. Vẫn bình an sau một cái sự kiện kinh khủng như thế thì đúng là nó vừa thú vị mà nó vừa thú vị mà lại vừa như là nhà dùng từ nhau cho đủ hợp lý nha. Thì nó thành một sự kiện lịch sử quan trọng ấy. Khi mà một cái sự việc đấy như vậy đó xảy ra. Để mà nói đến cái sự việc này thì thực ra mình cũng không đủ kiến thức, nhưng mà mình biết là thực sự rất là có nhiều thứ để nói, những cái việc là tại sao điều đấy có thể xảy ra được này, rồi tại sao những người bảo vệ Trump lại không làm tốt mà phải để đến cái tình huống đấy như thế xảy ra này, rồi điều này nó dẫn đến cái gì, và cũng như là cái chiến thuật của bên đảng Dân Chủ, cụ thể là Biden, thì nó thay đổi ngay lập tức sau vài tiếng. Tại vì là không thể kiểu cứ chỉ trích Trump mãi được, kiểu không, chính xác là không thể cứ chỉ trích Trump sau cái sự việc như thế được. Rồi những công ty kiểu nhân cái dịp này, không phải công ty mà những cá nhân, những tổ chức nhân cái dịp này để họ có thể kiếm tiền. Ví dụ như cụ thể như là bên Trung Quốc, hoặc bên những công ty của Trung Quốc ấy, họ làm ngay lập tức làm những cái áo in hình Donald Trump, cái hình mà ông ấy được hình chụp Donald Trump sau khi mà ông đấy bị bắn, một cái hình kiểu rất là iconic ấy. Thì tình cờ là một cái clip, một cái podcast cách đây bao nhiêu, 12 ngày, đúng 12 ngày à, thì mình cũng đã định xem rồi, mình plan mình xem trước rồi, nhưng mà không ngờ tình cờ là nó có sự việc này, cho nên là hôm nay sẽ xem. Rồi, chuyển màn.
The following is a conversation with Ivanka Trump, businesswoman, real estate developer, and former senior advisor to the President of the United States. I've gotten to know Ivanka well over the past 2 years. We've become good friends, hitting it off right away over our mutual love of reading, especially philosophical writings from Marcus Aurelius, Joseph Campbell, Alan.
Ghi vậy, đọc cả Marcus Eliot luôn. Nhưng mà trước tiên thì mình muốn double check là từ nãy giờ mình cái gì đây, mình muốn double check xem là cái tiếng nó bị vọng không khi mà mình nghe loa ngoài á. Mở mắt nhỉ, đèn nó sáng nên nó mở mắt hay sao ấy. Tiếng nó bị vọng không khi mà mình nghe loa ngoài.
Aurelius, Joseph Campbell, Alan, former senior advisor to the President of the United States.
Ngon. Thế là mình có thể nghe loa, vừa nghe loa ngoài mà vừa xem clip.
Watts, Viktor Frankl, and so on. She is a truly kind, compassionate, and thoughtful human being. In the past, people have attacked her, in my view, to get indirectly at her dad, Donald Trump, as part of a dirty game of politics and clickbait journalism. These attacks obscured many projects and efforts, often bipartisan, that she helped get done. And they obscured the truth of who she is as a human being. Through all that, she never returned the attacks with anything but kindness, and always walked through the fire of it all with grace. For this and much more, she is an inspiration, and I'm honored to be able to call her a friend. Oh, and for those living in the United States, happy upcoming 4th of July. It's both an anniversary of this country's Declaration of Independence and an anniversary of my immigrating here to the U.S. I am forever grateful for this amazing country, for this amazing life, for all of you who have given a chance to a silly kid like me. From the bottom of my heart.
For the bottom of my heart.
I love you all.
I love you all.
This is the Lex Fridman podcast.
Lex Fridman
to support
podcast.
It, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, here's Ivanka
Trump.
You said that ever since you were young, you wanted to be a builder, that you loved the idea of designing beautiful city skylines, especially in New York City. I love the New York City skyline. So describe the origins of that love of building.
You know, I think there's both an incredible confidence and a total insecurity that comes with youth. So I remember at 15, I would look out over the city skyline from my bedroom window in New York and imagine.
Ivanka Trump này sinh năm bao nhiêu ta? Mình nghĩ chắc phải cỡ, nếu ông Trump 6 mấy, ông năm 778 rồi, thì chị này phải cỡ 83. Xem nào, Ivanka Trump H 4281.
Imagine where I could contribute and add value in a way that, you know, I look back on and completely laugh at, you know, how confident I was. But I've known since some of my earliest memories it's something I've wanted to do. And I think I love art. I love expressions of beauty in so many different forms. With architecture, there's the tangible. And I think that marriage of function and something that exists beyond yourself is very compelling. I also grew up in a family where my mother was in the real estate business working alongside my father. My father was in the business, and I saw the joy that it brought to them. So I think I had these natural positive associations. They used to send me as a little girl renderings of projects they were about to embark on with notes asking if I would hurry up and finish school so I could come join them. So I had these positive associations, but it came from something within myself. I think that as I got older and as I got involved in real estate, I realized that it was so multidisciplinary. You have, of course, the design, but you also have engineering, the brass tacks of construction, there's time management, there's project planning, just the duration of time to complete one of these iconic structures. It's enormous. You can contribute a decade of your life to one project. So while you have to think big picture, it means you really have to care deeply about the details because you live with them. So it allowed me to flex a lot of areas of interest.
I love that confidence of youth.
It's funny because we're all so insecure, right, in the most basic interactions, but yet our ambitions are so unbridled in a way that kind of like makes you blush as an adult. And I think it's fun. It's fun to like tap into that energy.
Yeah, where everything is possible. I think some of the greatest builders I've ever met kind of always have that little flame of everything is possible still burning. That is a silly notion from youth, but it's not so silly.
Yeah.
You know, everybody tells you something is impossible, but if you continue believing that it's possible and have that sort of naive notion that you could do it, even if it's exceptionally difficult, that naive notion turns into some of the greatest projects ever done.
100%.
You know, going out to space or building a new company where like everybody said it's impossible, taking on a gigantic company and disrupting them and revolutionizing how stuff is done, or doing into huge building projects where, like you said, so many people are involved in making that happen.
We get conditioned out of that feeling.
Yeah.
We start to become insecure, and we start to rely on the input or validation of others, and it takes us away from that sort of core drive and ambition. So it's fun to reflect on that, and also to smile, right? Because whether you can execute or not, time will tell. But yeah, no, that was very much my childhood.
Yeah, of course, it's important to also have the humility once you get humbled and realize there's actually a lot of work to build. I still am amazed just looking at big buildings, big bridges, that human beings are able to get together and build those things. That's one of my favorite things about architecture, just like, wow, it's a manifestation of the fact that humans can collaborate and do something like epic, much bigger than themselves. And it's like a statue that represents that, and it can be there for a long time.
I think in some ways you look out at different city skylines, and it's almost like a visual depiction of ambition realized, right? Like it's a testament to somebody's dream, not somebody, a whole ensemble of people's dreams and visions and triumphs, and in some cases failures if the projects weren't properly executed. So you look at these skylines and it's a testament to that. I actually heard once architecture described as frozen music. That really resonated with me.
I love thinking about a city skyline as an ensemble of dreams realized.
Yeah. I remember the first time I went to Dubai, and I was watching them dredging out and creating these man-made islands. And I remember somebody once saying to me there, an architect actually who collaborated with us on our tower in Chicago, he said that the only thing that limited what an architect could do in that area was gravity and imagination. so it's you know.
Yeah, but gravity is a tricky one to work against. And that's where civil engineering is one of my favorite things. I used to build bridges in high school for physics classes. You have to build bridges and you compete on how much weight they can carry relative to their own weight.
Yeah.
You study how good it is by finding its breaking point. And that was a deep appreciation for me on the miniature scale on the large scale what people are able to do with civil engineering. Because gravity is a tricky one to fight against.
It definitely is. In bridges, I mean, some of the iconic designs in our country are incredible bridges.
So if we think of skylines as ensembles of dreams realized, you spent quite a bit of time in New York. What do you love about, and what do you think about the New York City skyline? What's a good picture? We're looking here at a few. I mean, looking over the water.
Well, I think the water is an unbelievable feature of the New York skyline. As you see the island on approach, and oftentimes you'll see, like in these images, you'll see these towers reflecting off of the water surface. So I think there's something very beautiful and unique about that. When I look at New York, I see this unbelievable sort of tapestry of different types of architecture. So you have the Gothic form as represented by buildings like the Woolworth Building, or you'll have Art Deco as represented by buildings like 40 Wall Street or the Chrysler Building or Rockefeller Center. And then you'll have these unbelievable super modern examples or modernist examples like Lever House and Seagram's House. So you have all of these different styles. And I think to build in New York, you're really building the best of the best. So nobody's giving New York their sort of second-rate work. Especially when a lot of those buildings were built, there was this incredible competition happening between New York and Chicago for kind of dominance of the sky. And for who could create the greatest skyline, this sort of race to the sky when skyscrapers were first being built, starting in Chicago, and then New York surpassing that in terms of height, at least, with the Empire State Building. So I love sort of contextualizing the skylines as well and thinking back to when different components that are so iconic were added and the context in which they came into being.
I got to ask you about this. There's a pretty cool page that I've been following on X, Architecture and Tradition, and they celebrate sort of traditional schools of architecture. And you mentioned Gothic, the Tapestry. This is in Chicago, the Tribune Tower in Chicago. So what do you think about that, sort of the old and the new mixed together? Do you like Gothic?
I think it's hard to look at something like the Tribune Tower and not be completely in awe. Like, this is an unbelievable building. Look at those buttresses, and you've got gargoyles hanging off of it. Yeah. And, this style was reminiscent of the cathedrals of Europe, which was very kind of in vogue in like the 1920s here in America. Actually, I mentioned the Woolworth Tower before. The Woolworth Tower was actually referred to as the Cathedral of Commerce. And because it also is in that Gothic style.
Sao nhỉ?
So this was built maybe a decade before the Tribune building.
Do cái mic ta?
But the Tribune building to me is almost not replicable. It personally really resonates with me because one of the first projects I ever worked on was building Trump Chicago, which was this beautiful, elegant, super modern, all glass skyscraper right across the way. So it was right across the river. So I would look out the windows as it was under construction or be standing quite literally on rebar of the building looking out at the Tribune and incredibly inspired. And now the reflective glass of the building reflects back not only the river but also the Tribune building and other buildings on Michigan Avenue.
Do you like it when the reflective properties of the glass is part of the architecture?
I think it depends. Like, they have super reflective glass that sometimes doesn't work. It's distracting. And I think it's one component of sort of a composition that comes together. I think in this case, the glass on Trump Chicago is very beautiful. It was designed by Adrian Smith of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, a major architecture firm, who actually did the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which is, I think, like an awe-inspiring example of modern architecture. But glass is tricky. You have to get the shade right. Some glass has a lot of iron in it and gets super green. And that's a choice. And sometimes you have more blue properties, blue silver, like you see here. But it's part of the character.
How do you know what it's actually going to look like when it's done? Like, is it possible to imagine that? Because it feels like there's so many variables.
I think so. I think if you have a vivid imagination, and if you sit with it, and then if you also go beyond the rendering, right? You have to live with the materials. So you don't build a 92-story building, glass curtain wall, and not deeply examine the actual curtain wall before purchasing it. So you have to spend a lot of time with the actual materials, not just the beautiful sort of artistic renderings, which can be incredibly misleading. The goal is actually that the end result is much, much more compelling than what the architect or artist rendered. But oftentimes that's very much not the case. Sometimes also you mentioned context, sometimes I'll see renderings of buildings. I'm like, wait, what about the building right to the left of it that's blocking 80% of its views? So architects, they'll remove things that are inconvenient. So you have to be rooted in
reality.
In reality, exactly.
And I love the notion of living with the materials in contrast to living in the imagined world of the drawings. Yeah. So both are probably important because you have to dream the thing into existence, but you also have to be rooted in like what the thing is actually going to look like in the context of everything else.
100%.
One of the underlying principles of the page I just mentioned, and I hear folks mention this a lot, is that modern architecture is kind of boring, that it lacks soul and beauty. And you just spoke with admiration for both modern and for Gothic, for older architecture. So do you think there's truth that modern architecture is boring?
I'm living in Miami currently, so I see a lot of super uninspired glass boxes on the waterfront, but I think exceptional things shouldn't be the norm. They're typically rare. And I think in modern architecture, you find an abundance of amazing examples of super compelling and innovative building designs. I mean, I mentioned the Burj Khalifa. It is awe-inspiring. This is an unbelievably striking example of modern architecture. You look at some older examples, the Sydney Opera House, and so I think there's unbelievable. There you go. I mean, it's like a needle in the sky.
Yeah, reaching out to the stars.
It's huge, and in the context of a city where there's a lot of height.
Yeah.
So it's unbelievable. But I think one of the things that's probably exciting me the most about architecture right now is the innovation that's happening within it. There's example of robotic fabrication, there's 3D printing. Your friend and who you introduced me to not too long ago, Neri Oxman, what she's doing at the intersection of biology and technology, and thinking about how to create more sustainable development practices, quite literally trying to create materials that will biodegrade back into the earth. I think there's something really cool happening now with the rediscovery of ancient building techniques. So you have self-healing concrete that was used by the Romans, an art and a practice of using volcanic ash and lime that's now being rediscovered and is more critical than ever as we think about how much of our infrastructure relies on concrete and how much of that is failing on the most basic level. So I think actually it's a really, really exciting time for innovation in architecture. And I think there are some incredible examples of modern design that are really exciting. But generally, I think Roosevelt said that comparison is the thief of joy. So
Yeah.
It's hard. You look at the Tribune building, you look at some of these iconic structures. One of the buildings I'm most proud to have worked on was the historic old post office building in Washington, D.C. You look at a building like that, and it feels like it has no equal.
Also, there's just a psychological element where people tend to want to complain about the new and celebrate the old.
Always. It's like the history of time. So
There's just people are always kind of skeptical and concerned about change.
Yeah.
And it's true that there's a lot of stuff that's new that's not good. It's not going to last. It's not going to stand the test of time. But some things will. And there's just like in modern art, and modern music, there's going to be artists that stand the test of time, and we'll later look back and celebrate them. Those are the good times.
yeah.
When you just step back, what do you love about architecture? Is it the beauty? Is it the function?
I'm most emotionally drawn, obviously, to the beauty, but I think as somebody who's built things, I really believe that the form has to follow the function. Like there's nothing uglier than a space that is ill-conceived, that otherwise it's decoration.
Chờ chút. Đứng dậy hơi khó này. I'm back.
And I think that after sort of that initial reaction to seeing something that's aesthetically really pleasing to me when I look at a building or a project, I love sort of thinking about how it's being used. So having been able to build so many things and in my career and worked on so many incredible projects, I mean, it's really, really rewarding after the fact to have somebody come up to you and tell you that they got engaged in the lobby of your building, or they got married in the ballroom, and share with you some of those experiences. So to me, that's equally as beautiful, the use cases for these unbelievable projects. But I think it's all of it. I love that you've got the construction, and you've got the design, and you've got then the interior design, and you've got the financing elements, the marketing elements, and it's all wrapped up in this one effort. So to me, it's exciting to sort of flex in all those different ways.
Yeah, like you said, it's dreams realized, hard work realized. I mean, probably on the bridge side is why I love the function. In terms of function being primary, you just think of like the millions
Oh my gosh,
of
look at that.
bridges.
Go down. You had, look at that.
Yeah, this is Devil's Bridge in Germany.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's like the most practical design, but look how beautiful that is.
Yeah, so this is probably, well, we don't know. We need to interview some people whether the function holds up, but in terms of beauty, and then like what we're talking about, using the water for the reflection and the shape that creates, I mean, there's an elegance to the shape of a bridge.
See, it's interesting that they call it Devil's Bridge, because to me, this is very ethereal. You know, I think about the ring, the circle, life.
There's nothing about this that makes me feel, maybe they're just being ironic in the name.
Unless that function's really flawed.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe
Nobody's ever successfully
crossed the bridge, yeah. But I mean, to me, there's just iconic. I love looking at bridges because of the function. It's the Brooklyn Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge.
Đi ngoài ta. Chắc chờ xíu đi. Chờ xíu nhé. mà bị Tào Tháo đuổi khá nặng. Chiều nay lúc khoảng 4 giờ chiều ấy thì mình ở công ty có một bạn ấy mời rủ ra ăn khoai lang, và may là mình không ăn, chứ còn nếu mà mình ăn ấy thì mình đã đổ tội là do bạn ấy rồi. Trước đây mình ăn hai cái bánh mì, và cách đây khoảng bây giờ là 9 giờ đúng không, thì cách đây khoảng hơn 2 tiếng là mình ăn một hộp sữa chua trước khi mà mình ăn cơm buổi tối. Thì như nào nhỉ, nếu mà do cái bánh mì trưa nay ấy, thì mình đã phải đi ngoài từ lúc nãy rồi, từ lúc buổi chiều rồi, chứ không phải chờ đến 9 tiếng sau mình mới đi ngoài. Buổi chiều thì mình không ăn gì lạ cả, cho nên là vào buổi tối thì ăn ức gà thì cũng khá là lành. Có rau thì hơi sống, nhưng mà mình nghi do sữa chua này. Sữa chua thì mình mua cũng hơn một tuần, hai tuần á. 2 tuần mé rồi, cho nên là khả năng sữa chua hết hạn. Mình sẽ mặc dù là lúc mình ăn ấy thì mình thấy rất là bình thường, vẫn là đặc biệt cái thứ bình thường, nhưng mà cái điện thoại tại đợt vừa rồi mua hơi nhiều, cho nên là mùng 2 tháng 8 hết hạn mà. Mùng 2 tháng 8 hết hạn này. Ngày sản xuất là 18 tháng 6, 18 tháng 7. Còn lâu, bởi vì là mình đã từng cất đã. Mình đã từng kiểu mua cái sữa chua mà nó cũ ấy, cho nên là mình biết là những cái sữa chua cũ ấy nó kiểu bất bình thường ạ. Chứ còn cái sữa chua này thì nó rất là đặc, cho nên là chắc chỉ có một lý do duy nhất là do rau hơi sống. Hôm nay mình ăn rau cải hơi sống, nhưng mà thôi, giờ ổn rồi. Quay lại nha.
Probably my favorites in the United States. Just in a city, to be able to look out and see the skyline combined with the suspension bridge, and thinking of all the millions of cars that pass, like the busyness, like us humans getting together and going to work, building cool stuff. And just the bridge kind of represents the turmoil and the busyness of a city as it creates. It's cool.
And the connectivity as well.
Yeah, the network of roads all come together. So the bridge is the ultimate combination of function and beauty.
Yeah. I remember when I was first learning about bridges, studying the cable stay versus the suspension bridge. And I mean, you actually built many replicas, so I'm sure you'll have a point of view on this, but they really are so beautiful. And you mentioned the Brooklyn Bridge, but growing up in New York, that was as much a part of the architectural story and tapestry of that skyline as any building that's seen in it. So,
what in general is your philosophy of design and building and architecture?
Well, some of the most recent projects I worked on prior to government service were the old post office building and almost simultaneously Trump Doral in Miami. So these were both two just massive undertakings, both redevelopments, which in a lot of cases, having worked on ground up construction, redevelopment projects are in a lot of ways much more complicated because you have existing attributes, but also a lot of limitations you have to work within, especially when you're repurposing a use. So this, the old post office building on Pennsylvania Avenue was
so beautiful.
It's unbelievable. So this was a Romanesque revival building built in the 1890s on America's Main Street to symbolize American grandeur. And at the time, there were post office being built in this style across the country, but this being really the defining one. Still to this day, the tallest habitable structure in Washington, the tallest structure being the monument, the nation's only vertical park, which is that clock tower. But you've got these thick granite walls, those carved granite turrets, Just an unbelievable building. You've got this massive atrium that runs through the whole center of it that is topped with glass. So having the opportunity.
Để xem là có trả lời câu hỏi là philosophy of design của chị này là gì không nhá.
To spearhead a project like that was so exciting. And actually, it was my first renovation project. So I came to it with a tremendous amount of energy, vigor, and humility about how to do it properly, ensuring I had all the right people. We had countless federal and local government agencies that would oversee every single decision we made. But in advance of even having the opportunity to do it, there was a close to 2-year request for proposal, like a process that was put out by the General Services Administration. So it was this really arduous government procurement process that we were competing against so many different people for the opportunity, which a lot of people said it was a gigantic waste of time. But I looked at that, and I think so did a lot of the other bidders, and say it's worth trying to put the best vision forward.
So you fell in love with this project.
I fell in love, yeah.
So is there some interesting details about what it takes to do renovation? Is there about some of the challenges or opportunities? Because you want to maintain the beauty of the old,
yeah,
and now like upgrade the functionality, I guess, and maybe modernize some aspects of it without destroying what made the building magical in the first place.
So I think the greatest asset was already there. Mm-hmm. The exterior of the building, which we meticulously restored, and any addition to it had to be done sort of very gently in terms of any signage additions. And the interior spaces were completely dilapidated. It had been in a post office, and was used for a really rundown food court and government office spaces. It was actually losing $6 million a year when we got the concession to build it, and when we won, and became one of, I think, a great example of public-private partnerships working together. But I think the biggest challenge in having such a radical use conversion is just how you lay it out. So the amount of time I would get on that Excella twice a week, 3 times a week, to spend day trips down in Washington, and we would walk every single inch of the building, laying out the floor plans, debating over the configuration of a room. There were almost 300 rooms, and there were almost 300 layouts. So nothing could be repeated. Whereas when you're building from scratch, you have a box, and you decide where you want to add, potential elements, and you kind of can stack the floor plan all the way up. But when you're working within a building like this, every single room was different. You see the setback. So the setback then required you to move the plumbing. So there was it was really a labor of love. And to do something like this, and that's why I think renovation, we had it with Doral as well. It was 700 rooms over 650 acres of property. And so every single unit was very different and complicated. Not as complicated in some ways. The scale of it was so massive, but not as complicated as the old post office. But it required a level of precision. And I think in real estate, you have a lot of people who design on plan, and a lot of people who are in the business of sort of acquiring and flipping. So it's more financial engineering than it is building, and they don't spend the time sort of sweating these details that make something great and make something functional, and you feel it in the end result. But I mean, blood, sweat, tears, years of my life for those projects, and it was worth it. I enjoyed almost every minute of it.
So to you, it's not about the flipping. To you, it's about the art and the function of the thing that you're creating.
100%.
What's design on plan? I'm learning new things today.
When proposals are put forth by an architect, and really just the plan is accepted and in the case of a renovation, like if you're not walking those rooms, the number of times a beautifully laid out room was on a blueprint, and then I'd go to Washington and I'd walk that floor, and I'd realize that there was a column that ran right up through the middle of the space where, the bed was supposed to be, or the toilet was supposed to be, or the shower. So there's a lot of things that are missed when you do something conceptually without sort of rooting it in in the actual structure. And that's why I think even, with ground up construction as well, people who aren't constantly on their job sites, constantly walking the projects, there's just a lot that's missed.
I mean, there's a wisdom to the idea that we talked about before, live with the materials and walking the construction site, walking the rooms. I mean, that's what you hear from people like Steve Jobs, like Elon.
Yeah.
That's why you live on the factory floor. That's why you constantly obsess about the details, the actual, not of the plans, but the physical reality of the product. I mean, the insanity of Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive working together on like making it perfect, making the iPhone, the early designs, prototypes, making that perfect, like what it actually feels like in the hand. You have to be there, like as close to the metal as possible to truly understand.
And you have to love it in order to do that.
Right. It shouldn't be about how much it's going to sell for or all that kind of stuff. You have to love the art.
Because for the most part, you can probably get 90, maybe even 95% of the end result, unless something has terribly gone awry by not caring with that level of almost like maniacal precision. But you'll notice that 10% for the rest of your life, So I think that extra effort, that passion, I think that's what separates good from great.
If we go back to that young Ivanka, the confidence of youth, and if we could talk about your mom, she had a big influence on you. You told me she was an adventurer.
Yeah.
Olympic skier and a businesswoman. What did you learn about life from your mother?
So much. She passed away 2 years ago now. And she was a remarkable, remarkable woman. She was a trailblazer in so many different ways as an athlete.
Ivanka mom age sinh năm 49 à? Cũng khá lớn tuổi rồi mà chết mất năm 71 tuổi. Sớm nhỉ?
And growing up in communist Czechoslovakia as a fashion mogul, as a real estate executive and builder, just this all-around trailblazing businesswoman. I also learned from her, aside from that element, how to really enjoy life. I look back and some of my happiest memories of her are in the ocean, just lying on our back, looking up at the sun and just so in the moment, or dancing. She loved to dance. So she really taught me a lot about living life to its fullest. And she had so much courage, so much conviction, so much energy, and a complete comfort with who she was.
What do you think about that? I mean, Olympic athlete, the trade-off between like ambition and just wanting to do big things and pursuing that and giving your all to that, and being able to relax and just throw your arms back and enjoy every moment of life. But like that trade-off.
Yeah.
What do you think about that trade-off?
I think because she was this unbelievable, formidable athlete, and because of the discipline she had as a child, I think it made her value those moments more as an adult. I think she was a great balance of the two that we all hope to find. And she was able to find both incredibly serious and formidable. I remember as a little girl, I used to literally traipse behind her at the Plaza Hotel, which she oversaw and actually kind of was her old post office. It was this unbelievable historic hotel in New York City. And I'd follow her around at construction meetings and on job sites. And there she is, dancing. See? That's funny that's the picture you pull up.
I'm sorry. The two of you just look great in that picture.
That's great. She had such a joy to her. And she was so...
She a joy to her. Niềm vui với cô ấy. A joy to her. A joy with her. Mình dùng with her, nhưng mà a joy to her.
A joy to her. And she was so unabashed in her perspective and her opinions. I mean, she made my father look reserved. So, whatever she was feeling, she was just very expressive, and a lot of fun to be around.
So she, as you mentioned, grew up during the Prague Spring in 1968, and that had a big impact on human history. I mean, my family came from the Soviet Union, And then, the 20th century, the story of the 20th century is a lot of Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union tried the ideas of communism, and it turned out that a lot of those ideas resulted into a lot of suffering. So why do you think the communist ideology failed?
I think fundamentally, as people, we desire freedom. We want agency. And my mom was like a lot of other people who grew up in similar situations where she didn't like to talk about it that often. Mm-hmm. So one of my real regrets is that I didn't push her harder, but I think back to the conversations we did have, and I try to imagine what it's like. She was at Charles University in Prague, which was really like a focal point of the reforms that were ushered in during the Prague Spring and the liberalization agenda that was happening. The dance halls were opening, the student activists, and she was attending university there right at that same time. So the contrast to this feeling of freedom and progress and liberalization in the spring, and then it's so quickly being crushed in the fall of that same year, when the Warsaw Pact countries and the Soviet Union rolled in to put down and ultimately roll back all those reforms. So for her to have lived through that, she didn't come to North America until she was 23 or 24. So that was her life. As a young girl, she was on the junior national ski team for Czechoslovakia. My grandfather used to train her. They used to put the skis on her back and walk up the mountain in Czechoslovakia because there were no ski lifts. She actually made me do that when I was a child, just to let me know what her experience had been. If I complained that it was cold out, she's like, "Well, you didn't have to walk up the mountain. You'd be plenty warm if you had carried the skis up on your back and up the last run."
I feel like they made people tougher back then. Like my grandma, you mentioned, it's funny, they go through some of the darkest things that a human being can go through, and they don't talk about it, and they have a general positive outlook on life, like that's deeply rooted in the knowledge of what life could be.
Yeah.
Like how bad it could get. My grandma survived Holodomor in Ukraine, which was a mass starvation brought on by the collectivist policies of the Stalin regime. And then she survived the Nazi occupation of Ukraine. Never talked about it. Probably went through extremely dark, extremely difficult times, and then just always had a positive outlook on life. And also made me...
Gần đây mình đang trải qua cái khoảng thời gian mà mình cảm thấy rất là mệt ấy. Tất nhiên là mình có cái cảm giác này nhiều năm nay rồi, nhưng mà mình vẫn luôn luôn hàng ngày vẫn cảm giác đây là khoảnh khắc mệt mỏi nhất. Bắt đầu mình kiểu bị suy nghĩ nhiều ấy, nhưng mà mình vẫn kiểu luôn cố gắng nhắc nhở bản thân là thực ra cái khó khăn của mình ấy chả là cái gì đâu. Nhưng mà dù gì thì mình vẫn cảm thấy kiểu khó chịu và bức bối và kiểu muốn buông bỏ ấy. Nhưng mà đấy, ví dụ đây là một tình huống cụ thể này, so sánh cái khó khăn của mình ấy với cả những cái khó khăn của bà, của Lex, thì đó đúng là một sự sỉ nhục với cả những cái khó khăn đấy luôn ấy. Bởi vì cái khó khăn của mình nó không được đưa lên bàn cân để so sánh cơ, vì nó quá nhỏ.
Me do very difficult physical activity, like just like you mentioned, just to humble you. Like kids these days are soft kind of energy, which I'm deeply, deeply grateful for on all fronts, including just having hardship and including just physical hardship flung at me. I think that's really important.
You wonder how much of who they were was a reaction to their experience. Would she have naturally had that sort of forward-looking, grateful, optimistic orientation, or was it a reaction to her childhood? I think about that. I look at this picture of my mom, and she was unabashedly herself. She loved flamboyance and glamour, and in some ways, I think it probably was a direct reaction to this very austere, controlled childhood. This was one expression of it. I think her, how she dressed and how she presented. I think her entrepreneurial spirit and love of capitalism and all things American was another manifestation of it, and one that I grew up with. I remember the story she used to tell me about when she was 14 and she was going to neighboring countries. And, as an athlete, you were given additional freedoms that you wouldn't otherwise be afforded in these societies under communist rule. So she was able to travel where most of her friends never would be able to leave Czechoslovakia. And she would come back from all of these trips, and the first place where she'd do ski races in Austria and elsewhere, and the first thing she had to do was check in at the local police. And she'd sit down, and she had enough wisdom at 14 to know that she couldn't appear to be lying by not being impressed by what she saw and the fact that you could get an orange in the winter, but she couldn't be too excited by it that she'd become a flight risk. So give enough details that you're believable, but not so many that you're not trusted. And imagine that as a 14-year-old, that experience and having to navigate the world that way. And she told me that eventually all those local police officers, they came to love her because one of the things she'd do is smuggle that stuff back from these countries and give it to them to give their wives perfume and stockings.
Yep.
And so she figured out the system pretty quickly. But it's a very different experience from what I was navigating and the pressures and challenges me as a 14-year-old was dealing with. So I have so much respect and admiration for her.
Yeah, hardship clarifies what's important in life. You and I have talked about Man's Search for Meaning, that book. Having kind of an ultimate hardship clarifies that finding joy in life is not about the environment, it's about your outlook on that environment. And there's beauty to be found in any situation.
Yeah.
And also in that particular situation, when everything is taken from you, the thing you start to think about is the people you love. So in the case of Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl thinking about his wife and how much he loves her. And that love was the flame, that the warmth that kept him excited. The fun thing to think about when everything else is gone. So we sometimes forget that with the busyness of life. You get all this fun stuff we're talking about, like building and being a creative force in the world. At the end of the day, what matters is just like the other humans in your life, the people you love.
100%.
It's the simple stuff.
Viktor Frankl is somebody, I mean, that book and just his philosophy in general is so inspiring to me. But I think so many people, they say they want happiness, but they want conditional happiness. When this and this a thing happens or under these circumstances, then I'll be happy. And I think what he showed is that we can sort of cultivate these virtues within ourselves, regardless of the situation we find ourselves in. And in some ways, I think the meaning of life is the search for meaning in life. It's the relationships we have and we form. It's the experience we have. It's how we deal with the suffering that life inevitably presents to us. And Viktor Frankl does an amazing job highlighting that under the most horrific circumstances. And I think it's just super inspiring to me.
He also shows that you can get so much from just like small joys, like getting a little more soup today than you did yesterday. I mean, it's the little stuff. If you allow yourself to love the little stuff of life, it's all around you. It's all there. So you don't need to like have these ambitious goals and the comparison being a thief of joy, that kind of stuff. Just like it's all around us, the ability to eat. Like when I was in the jungle and I got severely dehydrated because there's no water. You run out of water real quick. And I mean, the joy I felt when I got to drink. Like I didn't care about anything else. Speaking of things that matter in life, I would start to fantasize about water, and that was bringing me joy.
You can tap into this feeling at any time.
Exactly. Like, I was just tapping in just to stay positive.
Go into your bathroom, turn on the sink, and watch the water.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, people really, it's good to have stuff taken away for a time. That's why struggle is good, to make you appreciate, to have a deep gratitude for when you have it. And water and food is a big one, but water is the biggest one. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily to get severely dehydrated to appreciate water, but maybe every time you take a sip of water, you can have that kind of gratitude.
There's a prayer in Judaism you're supposed to say every morning, which is basically thanking God for your body working. It's something, so basic, but it's when it doesn't that that we're grateful. So just reminding ourselves every day the basic things of a functional body, of our health, of access to water, which so many millions of people around the world do not have reliably, is very clarifying and super important.
Yeah, health is a gift. Water is a gift.
Yeah.
Is there a memory with your mom that had a defining effect on your life?
I have these vignettes in my mind, you know, seeing her in action in different capacities. A lot of times in the context of things that I would later go on to do myself. So, you know, I would go every day, almost every day after school, and I'd go to the Plaza Hotel and I'd follow her around as she'd walk the hallways and just observe her. And she was so impossibly glamorous. She was doing everything in,
Yeah.
you know, 4.5-inch heels with this
Nice.
bouffant. And so it's almost like an inaccessible visual. But I think for me, when I saw her experience, the most joy tended to be by the sea. Almost always not a pool. And I think I get this from her. Pools, they're fine. I love the ocean. I love salt water. I love the way it makes me feel. And I think I got that from her. So we would just swim together all the time. And you know, it's a lot of what I love about Miami, actually, being so close to the ocean. I find it to be super cathartic. But a lot of my memories of my mom, seeing her really like just in her bliss, is floating around in a body of salt water.
Is there also some aspect to her being an example of somebody that could be sort of beautiful and feminine, but at the same time powerful, a successful businesswoman that showed that it's possible to do that?
Yeah, I think she really was a trailblazer. It's not uncommon in real estate for there to be multiple generations of people. And so on job sites, it was not unusual for me to run into somebody whose grandfather had worked with my grandfather in Brooklyn or Queens, or whose father had worked with my mother. And they'd always tell me these stories about her, you know, rolling in, and they'd hear the heels first. And a lot of times the story would be like, oh gosh, like, you know, really, it's 2 days after Christmas. Like, we thought we'd get a reprieve. But she was very exacting. You know, so I have this visual in my mind of her, you know, walking on rebar, you know, on the balls of her feet in these 4-inch heels.
Nice.
I'm assuming she actually carried flats with her, but I don't know. That's not the visual I have. But she was, I loved the fact that she so embodied femininity and glamour, and was so comfortable being tough and ambitious and determined, and this unbelievable businesswoman and entrepreneur at a time when she was very much alone. Even, you know, for me in the development world and so many of the different businesses that I've been in, there really aren't women outside of sales and of marketing. You don't see as many women in the development space, in the construction space, even in the architecture and design space, maybe outside of interior design. So, and she was, you know, decades ahead of me. So I love hearing these stories. I love hearing somebody who's my peer tell me about their grandfather and their father and their experience with one of my parents. It's amazing.
And she did it all in 4-inch heels.
And she did it. She used to say, there's nothing that I can't do better in heels.
That's a good line.
That would be your exact thing. And when I'd complain about wearing something, you know, it was like the early 90s. Everything was also like uncomfortable, these fabrics and materials. And I would like go back and forth between being super girly and a total tomboy. But she'd, you know, dress me up in these things, and I'd be complaining about it. And she'd say, Ivanka, pain for beauty, which I happen to totally disagree with, because I think there's nothing worse than being uncomfortable. Yeah. So I haven't accepted or internalized all of this wisdom, so to speak. But it was just funny. You know, she had a very specific point of view.
Mm-hmm. And full of good lines. Pain for beauty.
It's funny because, I mean, just even in fashion, if something's uncomfortable, to me, there's nothing that looks worse than when you see somebody like tottering around and like their heels hurt them, so they're kind of walking oddly, and you know, they're not embodying their confidence in that regard. So I'm like kind of the opposite. I start with, well, I want to be comfortable. and that helps me be confident and in command.
A foundation for fashion for you is comfort, and on top of that, you build
And it's
things
not
that are
comfort
beautiful.
like dowdy, you know.
Right,
there's
right.
that level of comfort, but
Functional comfort.
I think you have to. For me, I want to feel confident, and you don't feel confident when you're like pulling at a garment or, you know, hobbling on heels that don't fit you properly. And she was never doing those things either. So I don't know how she was wearing stuff like that. That's like a 40-pound beaded dress. And I know this because I have it and I wore it recently. And I mean, I got a workout walking to the elevator.
Yeah.
Like, this is a heavy dress. And you know what? It was worth it. It was great.
Yeah. She's making it look easy,
But
though.
she makes it look very, very easy. So
Do you miss her?
so much. It's unbelievable how dislocating the loss of a parent is. And her mother lives with me still, my grandmother, who helped raise us. So that's very special. And I can ask her some of the questions that I would have, wanted to ask my own mom, but it's hard.
Yeah, it was beautiful to see. I've gotten the chance to spend time with your family, to see so many generations together at the table. And there's so much history there.
You know, she's 97, and until she was around 94, she lived completely on her own. No help, no anything, no support. And now she requires really sort of 24-hour care. And I feel super grateful that I'm able to give her that, because that's what she did for me. It's amazing for me to have my children be able to grow up and know her stories, know her recipes, Czech dumplings and goulash, and kitsalitsa and all the other things she used to make me in my childhood. But she was a major force in my life. My grandmother, you know, my mom was working. So, you know, my grandmother was the person who was always home every day when I came back from school. And I remember I used to shower, and it would almost be like comical. I feel like in my memory, and there is no washing machine I've seen on the planet that can actually do this, but in my memory, I'd go to shower, you know, and I'd drop something on the bed, and I'd come back into the room after my shower, and it was like folded, pressed. It was all my grandmother. She was like running after me, taking care of me. So it's nice to be able to do that for her.
Yeah.
I got from her reading. My grandmother, she devoured books, like devoured books. She loved the more sensational ones. So like some of these like romance novels, I would pick them up, the covers, but she could look at like any royal lineage across Europe and tell you all the mistresses, all
the drama.
All the drama. She loved it. But her face was always buried in a book. You know, my grandfather, Dedo, he was the athlete. He swam professionally on the national team for Czechoslovakia, and he helped train my mom, as I was saying before, in skiing. So he was a great athlete, and she was at home and she would read and cook, and so that's something I remember a lot from my childhood. And she would always say, like, I got reading from her.
I mean, speaking of drama, I had my English teacher in high school recommended a book for me by D.H. Lawrence. It's supposed to be a classic. She's like, this is a classic you should read. It's called Lady Chatterley's Lover. And so I've read a lot of classics, but that one is straight up like a romance novel about a wife who like is cheating with a gardener. And I remember reading this like, what? Like in retrospect, I understand why it's a classic, because it was so scandalous to talk about sex in a book 100 years ago, whatever.
In retrospect, do you know why she recommended it to you?
I have no. I think maybe it's just sending a signal, hey, you need to get out more or something. I don't know.
Maybe she was seeking to inspire you, Lex.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I mean, I love that kind of stuff too, but I love all the classics, and they get there's a lot of drama. Human nature, drama is part of it. So what about your dad? Growing up, what did you learn about life from your father?
I think my father's sense of humor is sometimes underappreciated. So he had and has an amazing sense of humor. He loved music. I think my mom loved music as well, but you know, my father always used to say that in another life he would have been a Broadway musical producer, which is hilarious to think about. But he loves music.
That is funny to think about.
Right? He does. Now he DJs at Mar-a-Lago.
Nice.
So people get a sense of, you know, he loves Andrew Lloyd Webber and all of it, Pavarotti, Elton John. I mean, these were the same songs on repeat my whole childhood. So I know the playlist.
Probably Sinatra and all that.
Loves Sinatra, loves Elvis. You know, a lot of the greats. So I think I got a little bit of my love for music from him, but my mom shared that as well. I think one of the things, you know, in looking back that I think I inherited from my father as well is this sort of interest or understanding of the importance of asking questions, and specifically questions of the right people. And I saw this a lot on job sites. So I remember with the old post office building, there was this massive glass-topped atrium. So heating and cooling the structure was like a Herculean lift. We had the mechanical engineers provide their thoughts on how we could do it efficiently and so that the temperature never varied. And it was enormously expensive as an undertaking. And I remember one of his first times on a site because, you know, he had really empowered me with this project, and he trusted me to execute and to also, you know, rope him in when I needed it. But one of the first time he visits, we're walking the hallway and we're talking about how expensive this cooling system would be and heating system would be. And he starts stopping and he's asking duct workers as we walk what they think of the system that the mechanical engineers designed. First few, fine, you know, not great answers. The third guy goes, "Sir, if you want me to be honest with you, it's obscenely overdesigned. In the circumstance of a 1,000-year storm, you will have the exact perfect temperature if there's a massive blizzard or if it's unbearably hot, but 99.9% of the time you'll never need it. And so I think it's just an enormous waste of money." And so he kept asking that guy questions, and we ended up overhauling the design pretty well into the process of the whole system, saving a lot of money, creating a great system that's super functional. And so I learned a lot, and that's just one example of countless. That one really sticks out in my head because I'm like, oh my gosh, we're redesigning the whole system. Mm-hmm. You know, we were actively under construction. So it was, but I would see him do that on a lot of different issues. He would ask people on the work level what their thoughts were, ideas, concepts, designs. And there was almost like a Socratic sort of first principles type of way he questioned people, trying to get down to sort of trying to reduce complex things to something really fundamental and simple. So I try to do that myself to the best I can. And I think it's something I very much learned from him.
Yeah, I've seen great engineers, great leaders do just that. You see Elon do that a lot, which is basically ask questions to push simplification. So
yeah.
Can we do this simpler? And like, why? The basic question is like, why are we doing it this way? Can this be done simpler?
Yeah.
And not taking as an answer that this is how we've always done it. Sort of not allowing yourself to, like, it doesn't matter that's how it was done it. What is the right way to do it? And usually the simpler it is, the more correct the way.
Yeah.
Has to do with cost, has to do with simplicity of production, manufacture, but usually simple is best.
And it's oftentimes not the architecture, the engineers. It's, you know, in Elon's case, probably the line worker who sees things more clearly. So I think making sure it's not just that you're asking good questions, you're asking the right people those same good questions.
That's why like a lot of the Elon companies are really flat in terms of organizational design, where anybody on the factory floor can talk directly to Elon. There's not this managerial class, this hierarchy where it's travel up and down. There's not that.
Mình biết cái từ này nhưng mà mình không biết đọc kiểu gì.
Managerial.
There's not this managerial class, this hierarchy where it's travel up and down the hierarchy, which large companies often construct this hierarchy of managers where no one manager, if you ask them the question of like, what have you done this week? The answer is like, it's really hard to come up with. Usually it's going to be a bunch of paperwork.
Yeah.
So you like, nobody knows what they actually do. So when it's flat, you can actually get as quickly as possible. When problems arise, you can solve those problems as quickly as possible. And also you have a direct, rapid iterative process where you're making things simpler, making them more efficient, and constantly improving. So, yeah. It's interesting when large, I mean, you see this in government. A lot of people get together, a hierarchy is developed, and that somehow, sometimes it's good, but very often just slows things down. And you see great companies, great companies, Apple, Google, Meta, they have to fight against that bureaucracy that builds, the slowness that large organizations have. And to still be a big organization and act like a startup is the big challenge.
It's super difficult to deconstruct that as well once it's in place, right? It's circumventing layers and asking questions, probing questions of people on the ground level is a huge challenge to the authority of the hierarchy. And there's tremendous amount of resistance to it. So it's how do you grow something, in the case of a company, in terms of a culture that can scale, but doesn't lose its connection to sort of real and meaningful feedback. It's not easy.
I've had a lot of conversations with Jim Keller, who's this legendary engineer and leader, and he has talked about, like, you often have to kind of be a little bit of an asshole in the room, not in a mean way, but like it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these questions, they're uncomfortable. They break the kind of general politeness and civility that people have in communication. When you get a meeting, like nobody wants to be like, can we do it way different? Everyone wants just to like, this lunch is coming up, you know, I have this trip planned on the weekend with the family. Everyone just wants comfort. When humans get together, they kind of gravitate towards comfort. Nobody wants that one person that comes in and says, hey, can we like do this way better and way different? And everything we've gotten comfortable with, throw it out.
Not only do they not want that, but the one person who comes in and does that puts a massive target on their back and is ultimately seen as a threat. I mean, nobody really gets fired for maintaining the status quo, even if things go poorly. Mm-hmm. It's the way it was always done.
Yeah, humans are fascinating. But in order to actually do great, big projects, to reach for the stars, you have to have those people. You have to constantly disrupt and have those uncomfortable conversations.
And really have that first principles type of orientation, especially in those large bureaucratic contexts.
So amongst many other things, you created a fashion brand.
Ok. 1 tiếng. Còn 2 tiếng nữa. Thì mình có cái suy nghĩ từ lúc mà bắt đầu mình mới livestream ấy, thì mình luôn cố gắng là kiểu đúng đến giờ đấy là phải livestream. Nhưng mà mình muốn từ buổi sau trở đi mình muốn thử một chút. Mình muốn thử là mình live sớm hơn, và cái giờ giấc thì nó sẽ không kiểu cố định. Có thể là 7:30, có thể là 7 giờ lúc mình bắt đầu ăn cơm. Thì nó sẽ kéo dài thời gian hơn và mình muốn thử nghiệm một chút. Tất nhiên là vẫn là 246, nhưng mà cái thời gian nó thay đổi một tẹo như vậy. Rồi, hôm nay mình live đến đây thôi. Hẹn gặp lại buổi sau xem tiếp podcast của Lex Fridman với cả Ivanka Trump. Bye bye. Mở mắt rồi.